You know, when you think about war, you probably picture one big army fighting another, right? Tanks, jets, huge budgets. But right now, all across the world, something strange is happening. The side that looks stronger on paper, the one with all the gear and all the money, isn't always winning. In fact, sometimes they're getting completely outplayed by groups they should be able to just sweep aside. Let's get into it. So what we're seeing is this really puzzling trend where insurgents, criminal cartels, and all sorts of other groups seem to have a serious advantage against national militaries. And a lot of it starts with the firepower they're bringing to the fight. I mean, just let this quote sink in for a second. This is a cybersecurity expert in Nigeria, and he's flat out saying that local bandits have better weapons than the country's own army. He talks about soldiers who can't even get their rifles to fire while insurgents are running around with modern AK-47s. That's not just a small problem, that's a massive red flag. And look, this isn't just happening in Nigeria, not by a long shot. This is a global pattern. It's happening everywhere, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. Let's just jump over to Mexico for a second. We're not talking about your average street gang here. No way. The cartels down there control about a third of the entire country. Think about that. They're using military tactics, IEDs, weaponized drones. They're even hiring ex-special forces from other countries as mercenaries. And they're armed with these insane .50 caliber rifles that can literally tear an armored vehicle to pieces. This isn't just crime anymore, folks. This is war. Okay, so this brings us to the big question, right? How is this even possible? How can a cartel or a group of insurgents become a real military threat to a state-funded army? Well, the answer is complicated, and it's all about changing the very rules of the game. All right, so to really get our heads around how the weaker side can actually win, we've got to learn the lingo. We need to put a name to this new kind of battlefield. And that name is asymmetric warfare. It sounds a little technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's just a fight between two sides that are wildly mismatched. One side has all the money, all the tanks, all the jets. The other doesn't. Napoleon apparently once called it a fight between an elephant and a whale. They're both powerful, but they can't fight in the same place on the same terms. They have to get creative to hurt each other. Yeah, and this slide really breaks it down perfectly. Symmetrical warfare, that's the classic stuff you see in the movies, right? Two armies, more or less evenly matched, lining up on a battlefield. State versus state. But asymmetrical warfare, it's the total opposite. The smaller side knows they can't win a head-on fight, so they don't even try. Instead, they find and exploit every single weakness the bigger force has. So what's in their playbook? Well, instead of fighting out in the open, they'll use dense jungles, mountains, or even a crowded city as their battlefield. They do these quick hit-and-run attacks, and then, poof, they vanish, melting back into the civilian population. And here's the really clever part. They're not just trying to win battles, they target morale. They try to wear down the public's patience for a long, drawn-out conflict. The whole goal is to make the country seem ungovernable. But, and this is a big but, that strategy only works if the state itself is already fragile. And that fragility, that weakness, it often comes from a problem that has nothing to do with bullets or bombs. You see, a lot of the time, the reason a powerful army starts to crumble isn't because of the enemy at the gates. It's because of the enemy that's already inside. Right, so the tactics on the ground, that's only half the picture. If you really want to understand why these powerful states are struggling so much, you have to look inward. You have to look at the one thing that can rot an entire military from the inside out: corruption. Just take a look at these numbers from Transparency International. Russia's corruption score is a 22 out of 100. That is terrible. It's way below the average for its own region, and it's almost half the global average. And this isn't just a few politicians taking bribes. This is a level of systemic rot that seeps into every single institution, especially the military, making it way less effective than it looks on paper.
And if you think that's just an abstract number, think again. Look at this. This is all from just a 2-month period in 2024. The Deputy Defense Minister, arrested for bribery. The Head of Personnel, arrested. The Deputy Chief of the General Staff, arrested. All for massive fraud and embezzlement. I mean, when the very people in charge are stealing the money meant for the troops, what do you think happens on the front line? Soldiers go without equipment, without proper training, without the support they need. The entire system gets hollowed out.
So you've got this perfect storm, right? You've got insurgents using these clever asymmetric tactics against a state military that's being eaten alive from the inside by corruption. So what does a weakening state do when it feels threatened? It often overcompensates. It reaches for the one tool it thinks it has left, just overwhelming brute force.
But as we're about to see, that response, it doesn't just fail, it actually makes things a whole lot worse.
A massive study from the Rand Corporation looked at pretty much every major insurgency since World War II. That's 71 different conflicts, to try and figure out one thing. In a counterinsurgency, what actually separates the winners from the losers? And what they found is, well, it's pretty stunning. The iron fist approach, just trying to kill or capture every single insurgent, is statistically more likely to lead to the government losing the war. The successful approach, what they call the motive-based path, focuses on something totally different, taking away the reasons people join or support the insurgency in the first place. Things like corruption, a lack of basic services, or injustice. Okay, so if brute force is a recipe for disaster, what does a successful counterinsurgency actually look like? Well, the RAND study gives us a pretty clear roadmap. It really boils down to 4 key steps. 1. Force them to fight like guerrillas, not a regular army. 2. Choke off their support, the money, the weapons, the recruits. 3, and this is crucial, balance the military force with winning hearts and minds. And 4, maybe the most critical step of all, the government itself has to be seen as legitimate, because if the people see their own leaders as corrupt, nothing else you do is going to matter. But here's the real kicker. Even when a government starts doing everything right, even after they finally get the upper hand, the study found it takes an average of 6 more years to actually win. 6 years. This isn't a quick fight. It requires an incredible amount of patience and long-term commitment. Which leaves us with a final, kind of unsettling question. As we see more and more big, conventional armies struggling with these tactics, and as cartels and militias get more powerful and more militarized, are we looking at the new face of war? A future where victory isn't decided by who has the most tanks, but by who has the most patience, the most legitimacy, and the will to fight a very, very different kind of war.